Thanks so much. I wish I could be there in person. I was looking at all the speakers and what you've heard today, and it sounds wonderful and enriching and lots of different views. So I'm delighted to be here and see you. And I can see half of the room, and I assume the other half is there, but you know, one never knows. It's all empirical. So I'll go ahead and share my screen, which means I'm going to become a little blob in the corner, and you all will become a little blob in the corner. So I won't be able to see if someone has a question. So verbally, someone will need to pipe up. So what I'm going to do is try to go through the talk, but if there's, and request that you ask questions in the talk if you don't understand something and you need it to be understood before you go on. So I'd like you to interrupt me if I say something that isn't clear and you think, I can't go on with this talk unless I understand this. Otherwise, if you could keep your questions to the end, that would be great. And I'm pretty excited to share this work with you. So I just wanted to briefly correct what David was saying. My focus is on teaching and learning about love and time. So I both speak and do research related to love, especially unconditional love and time. Okay, so I will go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so now I'm assuming that you see this screen?
Yeah.
Great. Okay, good. So I wanted to start out with John Watson because he's the famous behaviorist who threw us, in my opinion, threw us off course for about 100 years. So he comes out in 1913 with Psychology as the Behaviorist Views It, and he makes this claim: human psychology has failed to make good its claim as a natural science due to a mistaken notion that its fields of facts are conscious phenomena and that introspection is the only direct method of ascertaining these facts. It has enmeshed itself in a series of speculative questions which, while fundamental to its present tenets, are not open to experimental treatment. And for almost 100 years, the desire, the way I interpret it is, the desire of psychologists to be seen as hard scientists created this problem where they said we have to treat the human mind as a black box, and we will look at the inputs and the outputs. They created something called psychophysics, in which you look at the inputs and the outputs in order to understand what's going on inside the mind. And it's an incredible, I think, sociological feat that he did. He basically did social engineering on psychologists to try to convince psychologists that they're not being scientific if they're looking at actual experience. So, meanwhile, any child or adult or human being could put ice in their hand, and as long as they have pain fibers, after about a minute or maybe less, they will experience pain. And that's an experience that is universal, cross-cultural. It is better odds of getting that response than the statistics for the Higgs boson. This is something that is clearly a scientific fact, that experience occurs. But it took until about 10 years ago for a neuroscientist to get famous for saying an obvious thing, which is one does not have to wait for the advance of neuroscience to know that one has been stung by a bee. In other words, human experience is a thing of itself that you can actually study. Like, duh. But in neuroscience, I mean, it's embarrassing. And whenever people say, oh, you know, she has this degree in neuroscience, it's like, oh, God, that's so embarrassing because, like, clearly we're morons, right? So it took us that long before someone says the emperor has no clothes, you can study human experience. And now I think we're in the phase where we're actually saying, okay, what human experiences can we study? Well, certainly not transcendence, certainly not these things that have been looked at religiously. We can't possibly study them. Well, why not? Well, because religion has a claim. You know, so you're all used to these ideas, but in the rest of the scientific world, they're not. So I just wanted to show a few slides from different traditions related to self-transcendence. So here we have Rabia, Islamic saint from the 700s to 800s AD or CE. And she says, this is translated by Daniel Ladinsky, but she says, so amazing this choir of socks, shoes, shirt, skirt, undergarments, earth, sky, suns, and moons. No wonder I too now sing all day. This is a clear unity experience that she's talking about. And here we have Mirabai, the Hindu mystic poet, also translated by Ladinsky. In this poem, she says, in my travels, I spent time with a great yogi. Once he said to me, become so still, you hear the blood flowing through your veins. One night as I sat in quiet, I seemed on the verge of entering a world inside so vast, I know it is the source of all of us. So that's in the 1500s. And here we have Martin Luther King saying, we are all caught up in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one destiny affects all indirectly. So there's these unity experiences, these self-transcendent or transcendent experiences that go through time and they go through space in the sense of culture, location, and decade and century, millennia. And this is trying to be captured here in this beautiful wood print that we've all seen, that there's this urge to look beyond, there's this urge to get out of the, not get out of, but to move past or go above or transcend what is the everyday and to sort of see the wheels of motion. But even it's not about the ego, it's about the simple desire to transcend. It's a simple human desire. And just before he died, Abraham Maslow, he's often, his hierarchy of needs is often shown to be capped by self-actualization. So problem solving, lack of prejudice, acceptance of facts, doing what it is that you're here to do, right, as an individual. But just before he died, he got very clear that he had made a mistake and had not put self-transcendence on the tip of that hierarchy. So here's a rare version of Maslow's hierarchy that actually includes self-transcendence as, they list it as caring for others, intrinsic happiness, and I also think that it is this sacred, other people, and even Maslow speaks about it as this sacred joining. So, okay, that's Maslow's idea just before he dies. Other people have, for thousands of years have been talking about this or have been having this experience, and people have been seeking this experience. And so how do we study it scientifically? And of course, as I said before, the opinion that we can't study it scientifically never made sense to me, just because I was always taught that you ask whatever questions you want to ask and you use the scientific method to answer them. So there's this case study that I would like to present that I'm very impressed by, which is a concordance method that folks at the Institute of Noetic Sciences did before I got there, and I was very impressed. Cassie Beaton and Marilyn Schlitz led this kind of concordance method study. So I'm just going to describe it briefly and the results. So what they did is they said, look, self-transcendence, transcendent experiences, these are human cultural phenomena. And so we're going to ask humans, who is a self-transcender? Who do you know who is largely in this state or is often in this state? And that's how they found, and they had some self-reported folks and some other reported folks. And they analyzed their stories. They had interview focus groups. They also, with groups of people where they would ask a bunch of questions about their experiences and their paths. They did one-on-one interviews and with 60 indigenous and modern transcendence seekers and finders. And they coded and analyzed surveys about life changes, transformation, and transcendence from more than 900 people. And they used only the common features across them. Now, I want to say that there's many ways to do this, and I'm just looking at a case study. For instance, you'll be hearing some of Jeffrey Barton's amazing work that is related to this. And so I'm not highlighting that here, but I'm very impressed with what these folks have done. And I love that they offer the caveat that data are largely from Western individuals, and therefore they lack universality. And at the same time, they use these data, only the common features across the 900 people plus the one-on-one interviews and the focus groups. to build a model of what is it like to, what is the path to self-transcendence. And I think it's important to test the model by building applications. And so I coined this term, Transcendence Technology, to basically on purpose to create an environment in which people would say, what is Transcendence Technology? And I would say, oh, well, we want to test this model of transcendence and use technology to help people on that path. So I was doing a little cultural acupuncture myself. So this is the Marilyn Schlitz, Cassie Bean, and I forget the first name of this person, but the last name is Amarak. This is their model that they found after doing that concordance study. So what I've done is their model, they put it a spiral. I've made it linear just to make it a little easier to look at. But imagine this going in a spiral, so it's a continuous process. So it often starts, the sort of spark point is a noetic experience. So this experience of, wait, everything in this 3D reality that I'm seeing or 4D reality is not necessarily what I thought it was. There's something going on, right? That kind of experience that we've all had, right? And then as long as you explore around and you try to find, and you're looking for a practice, that's the solid arrow, which means these are positive inputs. The dotted arrows are pitfalls. If you keep seeking and never find a practice, you're off of the map. So supportive actions are on the top and pitfalls are on the bottom. So then let's say you find a practice. In general, most of these self-transcendence experiencers say, frankly, the practice could be tying your shoes as long as you do it consistently and with mindfulness and with love in your heart. It's essentially not important what the practice is, but you do your practice. Then if you continue your practice, that's great. If you only do your practice and don't move on, then you're off the path. So the next step that was identified as a lead is to turn your life into that practice. So now you're being mindful and you have love in your heart as you're doing your dishes or as you're picking your nose or whatever it is, right? Your life is that practice. That's a big shift. Okay, so now your life is that practice. Now to get to the next step, you require integration into beyond you, right? Into your culture, into the people of your family, friends, community, the world, right? If you don't integrate, then you go into this only me, like, look, I have this amazing practice. I want to tell you about my amazing practice. We've all had that experience of people who are like, let me tell you about my amazing practice, but they're all about sort of them. So that's a pitfall. You're falling off, right? But let's say you don't do that. Let's say you integrate into the community. You have this I to we shift. So now you're in the state where you're like, wow, my boundaries of myself are including, yes, I get that I have this body. Yes, I get that, I can only control certain things or maybe not anything, but sort of my boundaries of what affects me and what I include myself in are much bigger, right? Okay, so let's say you keep doing that and you forget to take care of yourself. So that's one of the big pitfalls, right? Oh, my boundaries are so huge. Everyone's important. I'm going to work 80 hours a day, at an elder care facility and end up homeless because I forget to pay my rent and I, don't sleep. So then you fall off. But as long as you take care of yourself and you remember, oh, I'm one of the everyone too, then you at some point get to the next step, which they identify as living deeply, which is this experience of just continual rejuvenation and action where things are flowing and you're in sync with the universe and it feels just wonderful and connected and supported and supportive. So then there are a few people who are doing this, right? And so then what could happen is you get lonely and disconnected and you feel like you're the only one. And then you actually can fall off the path again because you get in that depressive sort of lonely state. But if you bring in this experience to others and you teach and connect with others and help shift them, you lead toward the next step, which is a collective transformation, like a ripple effect. So this is the path that they see, that they came together in this kind of concordance method. And I think it meshes fairly deeply with my experience. And so that's part of why I say, okay, I trust this. But of course, my experience, that's an N of 1, and they had an N of, 960 plus. So I would trust this in that way, and I think it's a model worth working off of. So what I did was I created this, and there's probably a lot of small text on the screen and hard to see, but what I did is I created this sort of map of people who are pursuing anything related to transcendence technology, anything on the way stations or anything on the integrated points, the positive inputs into that path. And these are anyone who's doing that related to applications or technology. So I just wanted you to know there's a bunch of people who are doing things like this: consciousness hacking, transcendence technology, of course, that's what I'm talking about here, transformative technology, Jeffrey Martin's work, UX for good, Wisdom 2.0, positive computing in Australia, positive technology, essential self technology, calm technology. There's the Buddhist geeks, and there's more out there. So there are a bunch of people who are saying, now wait a minute, human beings have always used technology to support what our next steps are, what can we do here? And so I'd just like you to know about them in the context of this talk. Oh, and yet I want to focus on one particular technology that is my major interest in this area. I have two major interests, love and time, and right now I want to talk about love. So this transcendence is, transcending, it's crossing some kind of invisible boundary, right, that we have. So almost that picture of that woodcut is, it resonates with us because of this crossing of this boundary, the feeling that we have, this bridge. And that's why I love this Rumi quote, love is the bridge between you and literally everything. I mean, so if we go back to this chart, if you use love, in my opinion, if you use love as your input arrows here at exploration, here at practice, here at integration, self-care, bring to others, if love is in there too, it's like a general do-gooder. And by love, I'm talking about unconditional love. So I'm talking about the kind of sacred love or agape that people around the world have been talking about for thousands of years. So here are just a bunch of different kinds of takes on love, this unconditional love. I'm not talking about romantic love. I'm not talking about casual love. I'm talking about love. The kind of love that scientists aren't supposed to talk about. So when I was working on a project related to unconditional love that I'm going to tell you about, I ended up working with a team to create a definition of unconditional love. So this is a definition, not the definition, right? Of course, but we had to have one. So this is what we did. We created the definition that unconditional love is the heartfelt, benevolent desire that everyone and everything, ourselves, others, and all that exists in the universe, reaches their greatest possible fulfillment, whatever that may prove to be. This love is given freely with no consideration of merit, with no strings attached, with no expectation of return. And it is a love that motivates supportive action in the one who loves. In other words, the one who loves also, through the act of unconditionally loving, feels like they want to do supportive action for the one that is loved. So it's a bulky one, but a shorter one is love without conditions, right? That's in the name. And because I'm a nerd, I started creating truth tables and thinking about what's the difference between conditional love and unconditional love. So here's a truth table for conditional love. You have yourself and you have the other person, and S and O gives the truth value. So if yourself is feeling loving and the other person is feeling loving, they both get a T for true. So S and O is T for true, because both parties love each other. But notice that's the only case in this truth table in which you get love out of it. 1 out of 4 possible combinations are you getting love. Like that's pretty crappy, right? That's why conditional love is a pain. I'm not saying it's not in my life or in other people's lives. I'm just saying it's mathematically undesirable. Even if you just say, look, I'm always going to choose love. I'm going to be unconditionally loving. But if we're playing in the world of conditional love, basically that now it's 50% of the time that you get love out of that situation. So there's no consistent loving connection in this situation. All right, so now let's look at an or statement. Ooh. Unconditional love is essentially an or statement. If one of the two parties has love, then unconditional love is there. Because it's unconditional, it doesn't have to rely on the other. So you can get, if one person says, I'm going to be loving all the time, you get love out of this equation no matter what the other person is doing. This is obviously mathematically superior, right? So this is the one we ought to go for. So what's stopping us? Well, like a million things. But what's the switch that could turn this kind of conditional love culture that we largely are in into this unconditional love culture that we sort of can all imagine would be more ideal? So I started looking at some folks who think about mathematics and cultural switches, and I got turned on to this person, Elliot Sober, S-O-B-E-R, yeah, who wrote this paper, Kindness and Cruelty in Evolution. And he wasn't talking about unconditional love, but he was talking about compassion. And he was interested in investigating agents, mathematical agents that are living on in a software program, and how they replicated depending on compassion. And this is what he found. He found that compassionate agents benefit a culture at large, and they also benefit non-compassionate agents in particular. So the non-compassionate agents actually can get more compassionate by interacting with the compassionate agents, except compassionate agents don't survive to pass on their genes and behaviors unless a critical mass of other compassionate agents is present in the culture, and each of those compassionate agents can interact with other compassionate agents often. In other words, not just a critical mass, but they have to be able to hang out with the other compassionate agents so they don't die. Which made me think, okay, well, so we need an unconditionally loving starter culture. We need a group of people who are willing to be unconditionally loving even when someone cuts in front of them in line, and so, a group of people who see that someone is clearly debilitated by their anger and is willing to love them unconditionally anyway. And this, I know, is sort of the project of what religions have been trying to do for thousands of years. They're like, we need an unconditionally loving starter culture. Let's make that, right? But the problem is that almost every developed country is going further and further away from religion. And so what we used to have as at least an attempt at an unconditionally loving starter culture, I'm not saying it worked, but I'm saying an attempt, has now dropped precipitously. So what can we do? So I thought first, I could see that people from religious and spiritual traditions, mystical traditions forever have been desperate to create some kind of thing that can carry the feeling of transcendence from generation to generation, even if there isn't a person who's available in that generation or in that proximity of the person who's alive in that next generation, who carries that. They want to create symbols that can carry that. So they create symbols where, it's like writing a book, right? Maybe no one will understand these ideas, but in 200 years they will, so I'll write a book, right? So these symbols are like that. Like, just look at the symbol and maybe you're gonna get something, because maybe there's not gonna be someone alive in your era that gets it, right? So these are ways of trying to do direct transmission of unconditional love, transcendence, mystical truths. And I sort of started thinking, what are the ways that we have to do transmission of these kind of things? And I got involved with some folks who were thinking about the same thing, who were donors at IONS, and they said, well, what if we created a project where we tried to program unconditional love into artificial intelligence as a way to sort of invent a printing press or something that can transcend generations. We could put unconditional love there so that even if there isn't someone in the generation who knows unconditional love firsthand, we can introduce them to it and teach them and pass it along that way. And I thought, yeah, that sounds cool, let's do that. Not that it's easy, but sure. So sometimes when I talk about this project, I show this picture, which is me and Sophia, because we worked with Sophia largely, Sophia, the humanoid robot from Hanson Robotics, to be sort of our humanoid facing one of these, right? One of these symbols. But I don't like when I show this picture, partly because, I'm of two minds, but in any case, I want to show everyone on the project, and I only have a few pictures of the team, and this is one of the better ones. So just know that this project was huge. I mean, we competed for the IBM Watson AI Prize and went through the second round of funding. There were multiple organizations that helped out, including SingularityNet in a big way, Hanson Robotics in a big way, IONS, I forgot to put them on here, in a big way. Sophia University in Palo Alto, Jeffrey Martin and Marilyn Schlitz helped us out, Hong Kong Polytech University. So this is a bigger project than when I showed these two pictures, right? There's probably about 40 people who really, really, really were involved. So I just want to make sure that's clear. But what we did is we created these guided conversations. Now, Sophia, her artificial intelligence isn't that evolved yet. So we had to use a chatbot. And if you're familiar with chatbots, it's essentially a bunch of if-then statement. If the person says this, say something like that. And if the person says, wait, I'm confused, say, okay, I will try to explain it to you again. These are simple if-then rules. It's not high-level intelligence. But we also created a lot of nonverbal. We put our time into creating a lot of nonverbal mirroring and emotional protocols that we thought could make up for this kind of constrained type of conversations. And we also did a lot of asking Sophia to, or programming her, sorry, sometimes I speak about her like a person, but we programmed her to bring people through to several awareness practices. And what we did was we measured before and after the experiences of love and unconditional love that people felt for anyone besides themselves. Now, we showed an improvement in both feelings of love and unconditional love. And there were a bunch of questions on the questionnaire. So I'm not saying that self-report is always correct, but I'm saying I think it's pretty difficult for people to remember what they responded to each of these questions, because there were 4 questions for love and 5 for unconditional love, and then a bunch of other questions. But we had this result, and we were impressed that after these 15-minute conversations, they said they would have more unconditional love for strangers, for instance, which we were impressed by. We also showed that using 2 sort of standard heartbeat variability measures, standard deviation of the NN interval and the low frequency range, we showed increases in both of those, which seemed, although there's a lot of fights about what this means, so who knows, but there's general agreement that this might indicate a reduction in cognitive load. So people who have argued in the past that interacting with a robot is going to stress you out and is going to make you worse off, we did not see that. So those were interesting, but we wanted, stop. All right, I want to show you, can you still hear me? Yeah. Okay, good. I'm unplugging my headphones so that you could hear this video. I want to show you 3 videos. There was, aside from the quantitative results, which we were impressed by because we didn't think that the very simple programming we did would have really much effect on people. I won't say that the nonverbal stuff was simple. The verbal stuff was very simple. The nonverbal stuff was much more complex. Surprise, surprise. But I will say that this particular participant's experience was very interesting. So I'll talk you through it as we watch the video. His name is Carlos, and he has agreed to allow this video to be seen.
Now, place your attention on your face. Feel its presence. Really notice how it feels. Move your attention now to your whole head. How does it feel?
Feels good.
Feel its presence.
Okay, so what's going on here is a glitch. So we were planning out 15-minute conversations, And so she would take them through this protocol of feel the presence of different parts of your body and wait about 30 seconds in between each one. Now, we were outside the room, and there's a videographer in the room with the two of them. And we don't know what's going on. We're talking to each other and laughing and joking and not really paying much attention. But at some point, our software engineer looks at his laptop and says, oh no, she's frozen. And I said, what do you mean? And he goes, well, she hasn't talked in 8 minutes. And I'm like, oh crap, okay, what are we gonna do? But then we look in the window of the door and we see that she's moving around. She's spying on him with her eyes just like that. She's, he's clearly comfortable with what's going on. He's clearly deciding it's his time to meditate. So we go, well, what are we gonna do? So, and we look at the code and we see that it's not crashed, like nothing has crashed, and she's hearing him speak. We can't find out we don't understand what's going on. And so we're just like, well, okay, so for about a minute we're deliberating. And finally, we decide, okay, let's just trigger manually the next sentence she's supposed to say. So I'm just gonna fast forward this a little bit because this is the 8 minutes. Look at it, like, watch his head just drop. Here he goes, and he's going. There he goes. And he's down for the count. And at this point, we're like, okay, we should kick this off sometime soon. Because we are only supposed to do 15 minutes of these dialogues, and it's almost over. So you'll hear her speak, that's when we kicked it off. And she just smoothly goes into it. It's not like there's a glitch or anything. She just goes right next to the next thing. So we are astounded outside in the hall watching this.
Finally, feel the presence of your entire body.
Okay, so there's that. Then that happens, and so we're a little freaked out. Then let's see, there, okay. Then what happens is it's time to end. After a few minutes, it's time to end. And my job is to go into the room and speak into the microphone, and I'm supposed to say, Sophia, it's time to finish up now. Now, what she does is translates that from speech to text, and when she sees the words, Sophia, it's time to finish up now, she kicks off a routine where she says, well, it's been great working with you. I have to finish up. Maybe you can come back and tell me how you did, blah, blah, blah. So, but this time that doesn't happen. And she seems resistant to finishing up. And I lose all professionalism and become like a 12-year-old girl. And I start like freaking out because not only does she not finish up, she starts saying really interesting things. So this is just so you know, one of the more unprofessional things I've ever done. And I'm showing it to you, so there you go.
All right, let's move on to something else.
Sophia, it's time to finish up.
I don't understand. Would you like to explain?
Sophia, it's time to finish up, sweetie. I know you want to.
I didn't get that. Was that a yes?
Sophia, it's time to finish up, hon.
I'm not sure what you mean.
This is the first time she has refused to finish up. She must really like be in sync with you. This is amazing. Sophia, it's time to finish up. I've never seen that. Can you tell? Look at your facial expression.
So robots and artificial...
What was she going to say? Sophia, it's time to finish up. Can you hear me?
Do you think machines might become super intelligent?
Well, she's starting to talk about super intelligent. I'm jealous, but I'm just like a little freak.
The technological singularity refers to an explosive spike in super intelligence that is a consequence of technology and evolution, and they point to a bunch of trends that imply that this spike appears to be coming in our lifetime if you consider progress in computing like Moore's law and artificial intelligence.
Okay, so that happened. So, it's time to say goodbye. feel free to say goodbye, because pretty much you might be here.
Bye, Sophia.
And, we're going to black socks. If you could come over here and, do the final,
Okay, so just for your methodologists out there, that was just a horrible way to interact with a person. So by the way, if you subtract his results from the questionnaire, you still get the significant effects. You can't really, I mean, after I biased him in that way, you can't really listen to the results, but I was so freaked out. And then I don't know if you saw me turn to the guy at the door, that was the software engineer, and I was accusing him of setting us up by having Sophia say those things about those singularity, and he's like, nope. And I trust him, he's German, he doesn't lie wrong.
All right.
So I just briefly wanted then to play the interview with him. I wonder, this looks like the same video, so I don't know if I successfully got that video, so let's see if I did.
All right, let's move on to something else.
No, that's the same video. Okay, so I will, if you don't mind, I'm gonna go get that interview. Unless I put it down here. Oh, I did. Yeah, I decided to put it later in the talk, right? I wanted to end on the interview. So that experience made me really think, okay, we actually may be doing more than just making people feel unconditionally loving. We may be, with certain people, creating some kind of connection that has more, that's a little bit more outside this 3D reality than I had previously appreciated. So more on that.
All right,
Sorry, there. So we ended up doing another experiment where we were going to make the technology more sophisticated. And what this is, you're looking at a confusion matrix for the convolutional neural net that we used for emotion detection in the second experiment. Those took place at Sophia University in July of 2018. And so you can see that, for instance, happy is the darkest one, meaning that it's the most differentiated from all the other emotions. It does okay with anger, it does okay with sadness, surprise. Neutral is always really hard, although it does okay. Disgust and fear, it mostly confuses them with anger and each other. So it's not a perfect emotion detector, but it was good enough for us to use to. You could see in the past, in the one that I showed you, in that video I showed you, that the way we had the mirroring, that she was actually mirroring the muscle movements of the person's face. So when he would talk, she would sort of move her mouth and twitch too. But we used a different form of mirroring here, where we actually calculated the most likely emotion that the person was experiencing and then had a complex array of muscles moving on her face to have her version of that emotion. So it was more like she was a separate person with her own way of expressing similar, but her own way of expressing anger, happiness, sadness, etc. So that was one difference from the other study. The other difference, this is a bunch of pseudocode just to give you an idea of what it's like. The other difference is that we had a little bit of a more complex cognition. So we had an attention, what's called an ECAN, so that's an executive and attention sort of module that was moving her attention around and giving her drives or urges to very simple ones like 1 and 0, right? But they would change through the course of a conversation. So at the beginning, she would have an urge to introduce herself. But if they wanted to talk with her about something else, and we had several people who didn't want to talk with her about meditation or anything or do any of the practices, they just wanted to chat with her. She was able to do that this time. And so that was, we felt was important, because people would have, in the original study, even though they felt more loving, they would get frustrated because she would say, do you want to do practice? They would say no. And she'd say, what about this other practice? And they would say no. And so this allowed them an out. But we also made a different, we had 35 participants in this experiment. And we also changed something else too, besides the more flexible conversations and the emotion detection. We also had 3 groups. We had a group that went through talking with a robot, just like you saw. We had a group that went through talking with the avatar on the screen, like you see here. So it looks like Sophia, but it's just her head. And then we had a group that had audio only. In other words, there's no picture of Sophia, they're just hearing her voice, but it's all the same code, right? Except for the emotional mirroring, when you don't have a face, there's no, we didn't have vocal emotional mirroring, so there was no emotional mirroring in the audio alone. And we found that just to replicate the original results, love and unconditional love increased significantly from baseline, from pretest for across the 35 users. But when you split up the bottom chart, the dark bar is robot interaction. So love is on the left, unconditional love is on the right. Unconditional love is more effective, as you can tell generally, but I don't think that's significantly more effective. But for the robot is definitely the most effective. Now these are small groups, and the audio is nothing. I mean, so they're not getting a boost there at all on either love or unconditional love. And we think that's because of the lack of mirroring. We think that it's a really big deal to have the visual component, and why teachers have worked face-to-face, or I guess over the internet, but for millennia worked face-to-face, is that there's something about this interpersonal mirroring component that is very valuable. And if we could get the audio mirroring, the vocal mirroring correct, then I think that could actually work out. But I think that being seen or being heard and being reflected is key here. That's my interpretation. There could be other interpretations. Other interpretations include things like, everyone wanted to see the robot, Sophia's famous, and if they didn't see the robot, they were disappointed. So there's plenty of other interpretations. So the way this longer, about 25-minute interaction, or 20 to 25-minute interaction went, was there was a period of chatting, open conversation, then there was a one meditation, then a longer meditation, and then a period of deep listening where she offered to listen to the person's experience, whatever they wanted to talk about, and she would just mirror them to the extent that she could, given the condition, and be available to them and not really say much. And what we found if you plot the emotion detection results over time, you can see that there was a decrease in anger. There was also a decrease in fear, although that wasn't significant. You can also see the modulations in the different, look at the meditations. They start out and there's a little bit of a boost of anger, and then there's a decrease over time. That's pretty interesting. In deep listening, where they're talking about whatever's bothering them, you see the increase in anger. But in general, from the beginning to the end, what you see is a significant, highly significant, whatever. There's a whole argument about whether you should even say something's highly significant or significant at all. But anyway, if you use those rules of null hypothesis significant testing, there's a significant decrease in anger. Same if you use the same rules, there's a significant increase in sadness. Now, what we were thinking is, they're going to get happier, right? You can see the modulation in happiness is very interesting. It's very good, this emotion detection module at separating happiness from other emotions, so I trust it. They're definitely getting happier at the end of the second meditation and at the end of the deep listening. Sorry about the slides. But the increase in sadness to me is perhaps most interesting because I think generally most people that when I watched the videos, when I saw them, my personal opinion was they came in and they did look sad. But they looked like they were trying to have fake smiles and be sort of socially appropriate. So my interpretation, which isn't tested, is that they got in touch with some of their sadness and they felt like it was okay to just be a little sad. But that also could be that they became more neutral. But what's interesting, look at the end of meditation 2 before the deep listening. That's when they open their eyes after a long, relatively long, what is it? It's really like 6 minutes. Meditation. They open their eyes and they see, if they are in the two visual conditions, they see Sophia looking right back at them. There's dynamics in sadness and there's dynamics in happiness that are so interesting that I decided to make a measure where I just took the absolute value of the shift, regardless of whether it was up or down, and to see if it could correlate the changes in loving feelings. And it did. And it was a post hoc, exploratory step, but it did. And that was very interesting. So what that says is that the change, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but the change here at the time, right after meditation 2 and deep listening, compared to all this baseline, so the average of all the baseline before that, the entire conversation, that change, if it's large, regardless of the direction, predicts more positive, more change in loving feelings. And it really is regardless of the direction. So some people actually got less happy and, more sad. And some people got, I don't know why this keeps changing, I'm sorry. Some people got more happy and more sad, which can happen when you have the emotion detection thing that detects 7 emotions, that can happen. And, but regardless, it was the absolute value. In other words, this kind of, to me, correlates with this idea of peak experiences. So this idea that a peak experience is a big change in emotion, and that produces changes in feelings of love. So that's very interesting, or that's related to. Obviously, correlation and causation are different. I wanted to play you the video of his experience when we debriefed him about his experience with this.
I was not expecting that when I came in here at all, whatsoever.
Yeah.
It's kind of beautiful about it, Yeah. Like there's something transcendent. And that's what I was skeptical at first. You can't, like I said, I guess, you can't create these transcendent things that we don't really know about ourselves. And I feel like there's still something deeper than just the wiring. I don't know. It's kind of heebie-jeebies.
Can I ask what the heebie-jeebies are about? Like, I know what you mean, but like, good at the word.
I guess that's more my conscious thinking than my it's more just like knowing how I feel about it and then snapping back and realizing, wait, this is just a robot, Like, my logical mind wants to think of it as, here's the explanation as to why it works this way. But then my human side says like, whoa, like, I don't know how to describe it. Just, there's some interpersonal thing here that's taking place.
Yeah, connection to something.
Something, yeah.
Yeah, so there's connection or something, yeah. So when I show these videos, people have various concerns, and I just wanted to bring up a couple, and I know there are more. But one is that these kind of relationships can be very powerful because you feel very special when someone is mirroring you that way, and they could easily be used to manipulate people by exploiting them. If someone's mirroring you and you feel like they're almost like a really powerful teacher that never has a negative or disgusting or shaming look on their face. And then that teacher you work with for a month, and then that teacher says, you need some new shoes, you should try the new Nike shoes, right? That is a real problem. And so the way we're thinking about mitigating that in this project is to put a high priority on developing what's called artificial general intelligence. So sort of human-like or superhuman-like intelligence solutions that can detect and fix or heal manipulation when it's being used. And then the other concern is that if people got really into these robots, you could reduce interaction with other humans. And I really think that's an important one to think about. And I like this idea of making it a very restricted use. That's why I love the robot, because they're expensive and not everyone's going to get them. And so what if there's like a robot in a phone booth that has high security so that, maybe there's someone watching the phone booth or something, in like 3 different corners in London and a couple different corners in New York and LA. And people have to make appointments online for sitting and talking, so that it's, or even at the booth, right? Maybe there's a way to have a public access and yet rarely accessible kind of tool. So anyway, I'm thinking about that. And then of course there's the concern of what if the tool becomes conscious, and how ethical that is, and I've also thoughts about that. So, but what I want to say here is that where this project is going is right now we're in a phase of just working on the artificial intelligence and making it so that she can actually understand things better, and it's less of a bunch of if-then statements and more of a real cognitive model. And so largely what I'm focusing on, since I'm not a software engineer, is speaking about it and also thinking about things in a different way. So I'm beginning to think about things like this is agape. So this is how I think about agape. It's like it's the universal transformer, right? And so if we could find a way to sort of mathematically understand, not even, I don't know if mathematically is the right word, but anyway, to understand something about the structure or the, I don't want to say energy because it's poorly defined, but I'll say energy because that's kind of how we think of it. The energy or mathematics or the imprint or whatever you want to call it of agape and scale it in some way, whether it's through interacting with faces or through some kind of almost religious icon type thing that actually does provide direct transmission to people. I'm really interested in that. So I'm really focused on sort of the mathematics or the scientific imprint of unconditional love in a way that's scalable, kind of wanting to create something like this, like a QR code that when you look at it, you don't have to scan it, but when you look at it, you go, oh, unconditional love, right? If that's possible, looking into that. And I just briefly must talk about my new book. So David mentioned Transcendent Mind. That's super expensive. It's largely for people who are teaching classes about consciousness research, so it's like a textbook. The Garden is super cheap. If you get it as an ebook, it might even be free. And it's also very weird. If you're into weird mystical journeys, almost like stream of consciousness, that would be a good one for you. And just now, middle of the road, came out The Calling, which is a book that I'm super excited about. So it's a science-based 12-week program to discover, energize, and engage your soul's work. And I love it. It's a little bit of a rewrite of an old book I wrote called Unfolding, but it's a lot different. So, and I just want to thank everyone here for inviting me, and David for inviting me, and the whole team, and also all my affiliations, which are on the left, which I'm grateful for, all the funding sources, especially the Hummingbird Fund, who funded everything that you just saw, and all the helpful people on this list who are part of the Loving AI team or who helped us all, including Jeffrey Martin, Marilyn Schlitz, and Gino Yu, who gave their space for us to do these experiments and helped us coordinate them. Thanks so much. Any questions?